I've been thinking about that night for months now. The way the gym lights hummed overhead, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The way the air smelled like sweat and old leather and something metallic that clung to the back of my throat. Most of all, I've been thinking about the exact moment Jonah's voice died mid-sentence, and how the silence that followed changed everything between us. It was late, past 10, maybe closer to 11. The rest of the team had cleared out an hour ago, their voices and laughter fading into the parking lot, car doors slamming, engines turning over and disappearing into the night. But Jonah and I stayed. We always stayed. It had become our ritual over the past 2 years, this unspoken agreement that practice didn't really end when coach blew the whistle. It ended when one of us finally admitted defeat, when our legs gave out or our shots stopped falling, when we'd pushed each other so far past exhaustion that going home felt like the only reasonable option left. That night, I'd won our last game of one-on-one. Barely. By 2 points, a lucky bounce on a shot that had no business going in. I knew it. Jonah knew it too. But winning was winning, and I wasn't about to let him forget it. I was standing near the free throw line, tugging at the hem of my jersey where it had twisted during our game. My chest was still heaving, my legs shaking slightly from the effort of keeping up with him. Jonah had this way of playing that made you feel like you were always one step behind, always scrambling. He was quick and unpredictable, all sharp cuts and sudden changes in direction. Playing against him felt like trying to catch smoke. He was across from me, hands on his hips, head tilted back as he caught his breath. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, his face flushed. When he finally looked at me, there was that familiar smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. The one that meant he was about to say something to get under my skin. Guess I won again. You slowing down? I heard the challenge in his voice, the teasing edge he always carried when he knew he'd push me hard. It should have annoyed me. Usually it did. But something in the way he said it that night felt different. Softer, maybe. Or maybe I was just too tired to care. I scoffed, shaking my head. Luck. Pure luck. I tried to match his grin, tried to keep the banter going the way we always did. My heart was still pounding, but not just from the game. There was something else building in my chest, something I'd been trying to ignore for weeks now. Jonah's grin widened for a moment. He opened his mouth like he was going to fire back, probably something about how luck had nothing to do with it, how I'd gotten sloppy in the fourth quarter, how he let me win because he felt sorry for me. I could already hear it. I was bracing for it. But then he stopped. His mouth hung open slightly, the words dying before they could form. His eyes, which had been bright with that competitive spark just seconds ago, suddenly went still, fixed on mine, not looking at me the way teammates look at each other, not even the way friends do. It was something else entirely. The smirk faded from his face, slowly like watching ice melt. His expression shifted and it was something unguarded, something raw that I'd never seen on him before. And he just kept staring. 3 seconds. 5. Long enough that the air between us began to feel thick, charged with a tension I didn't have words for. My chest tightened. I wanted to say something to break the silence, to make a joke that would pull us back into familiar territory. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, because I knew, standing there under those fluorescent lights with the echo of the last basketball still fading against the walls, that something had just shifted between us, something we couldn't take back. Jonah blinked. Once, then again, like he was coming out of a trance. His jaw tightened. He looked away quickly, running a hand through his hair, letting out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but wasn't. Not really. I should get going, he said, but his voice came out rougher than usual. Strained. I nodded, even though I didn't want him to leave. Even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to ask him what had just happened, to make him explain why he'd looked at me like that. But I didn't, because I was afraid of what he might say. More afraid, maybe, of what I might say back. He grabbed his bag from the bleachers, moving too quickly, like he was trying to outrun something. I watched him cross the gym, his footsteps loud in the quiet. He reached the door, pushed it open, and paused. For a second, I thought he might turn around. Thought he might come back and say whatever it was he'd swallowed down. But he didn't. The door swung shut behind him with a hollow thud, and I was alone. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the spot where he'd been standing. The gym felt too big suddenly, too empty. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating. I kept replaying that look in my mind. The way his eyes had gone soft and serious. The way his grin had collapsed into something vulnerable. The way he'd forgotten what he was going to say. I'd known Jonah for 2 years. Since my first day on the team, when I'd been a nervous transfer student trying to prove I belonged, and he'd been the loudest voice in the locker room, the one who made everyone laugh, who filled every silence with noise and energy. He'd taken me under his wing without hesitation, made me feel like I was part of something. We'd become close fast. Best friends, people said. Inseparable. But this wasn't friendship. Not the look he'd given me tonight. I finally forced myself to move, gathering my things, turning off the lights. As I locked up the gym and walked to my car, the cold night air bit at my skin. I sat in the driver's seat for a while, hands on the wheel, engine off, just staring at the dashboard. Because the truth was, I'd felt it too. That shift, that weight. I'd felt it in the way my pulse had jumped when his eyes locked onto mine. In the way I'd wanted him to keep looking, even though it terrified me. In the way I'd been hyper-aware of every inch of space between us, of how easy it would be to close that gap. I'd been pretending for months that the things I felt around Jonah were normal. That the way I noticed him in every room, the way my mood shifted depending on whether he smiled at me or not, the way I found excuses to stay late just so we could be alone together. I've been telling myself it was just friendship, just competition, just the natural intensity that comes from pushing each other to be better. But tonight, when he looked at me and forgot how to speak, I couldn't pretend anymore. And the worst part, the part that made my hands shake as I finally started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, was knowing that he couldn't pretend anymore either. I should probably explain who I am, who we were back then before everything got complicated. My name is Reese. I'm 22, though most days I feel older than that. I've always been the steady one, the reliable one. The guy who shows up early and stays late, who keeps his head down and does the work. My high school coach used to say I had an old soul, whatever that means. I think he just meant I was boring, predictable, the kind of player you could count on, but never really worry about. I didn't mind. I liked routine. I liked knowing what came next. Basketball had always been my anchor. I wasn't the most naturally gifted player on any team I'd ever been on, but I made up for it with discipline, with repetition. I'd spend hours in the gym perfecting my form, running the same drills until my muscle memory could execute them in my sleep. I found comfort in that kind of structure, in knowing that if I put in the work, I'd see results. When I transferred to this college halfway through my sophomore year, I didn't expect much beyond a fresh start. A chance to play at a higher level. Maybe a chance to prove I belonged somewhere. I'd spent my first year at a smaller school downstate, and it had been fine, but it hadn't felt right. So I'd packed up everything, driven 6 hours north, and walked into a locker room full of strangers who'd already spent a year becoming a team without me. That's when I met Jonah. He was impossible to miss. 23, a year older than me, and the kind of person who seemed to take up more space than his body actually occupied. Tall and lean, all restless energy and sharp edges. He had this presence that filled whatever room he walked into, this magnetic quality that made people gravitate toward him whether they meant to or not. In a locker room, he was always the loudest voice, the one cracking jokes, the one turning everything into a competition or a story worth telling. I'd been intimidated by him at first, not because he was cruel or unwelcoming, but because he was so effortlessly charismatic in a way I'd never been. He made friendship look easy, made everything look easy, really, even when I knew it wasn't. But Jonah had seen something in me that first week. Maybe he'd recognized the nervousness I was trying to hide, or maybe he just liked having someone new to compete against. Either way, he'd singled me out during practice, challenged me to shooting drills, talk trash in that playful way that made you want to prove him wrong. And somewhere in those early weeks of pushing each other, of staying late to run one more game, of riding that line between competition and camaraderie, we'd become friends. Close friends. The kind who knew each other's routines, who could communicate with a glance across the court, who spent more time together than apart. Everyone on the team knew we were a package deal. If you invited one of us somewhere, you invited both. If one of us had a bad game, the other stayed after to help work through it. We balanced each other. I was the calm to his chaos, the steadiness to his recklessness. He pulled me out of my comfort zone, made me take risks I wouldn't have taken on my own. I grounded him, gave him someone who wouldn't just laugh at his jokes, but would call him out when he was avoiding something real. It worked. For 2 years, it worked perfectly. Except I'd started noticing things I shouldn't have been noticing. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something genuinely funny versus when he was just performing for the team. The way he bit his bottom lip when he was concentrating on shot. The way his hand would linger on my shoulder a half second longer than necessary when he was making a point. The way my heart would skip when I heard his voice calling my name across the gym. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was reading into things that weren't there. Jonah was straight, as far as I knew. He dated girls occasionally, though never seriously. He talked about women the way all the other guys on the team did, with that casual performative interest that seemed more obligatory than genuine. And I had no reason to think I was anything other than his teammate, his friend, his favorite person to antagonize on the court. But then there were moments, small ones, moments when the noise would die down and it would just be the two of us, and something in his expression would shift. When he'd look at me a beat too long, or when his voice would drop lower, softer, like he was telling me a secret even though his words were ordinary. Moments when the space between us felt charged with something I couldn't name. I'd learned to ignore those moments, to file them away as wishful thinking, as my own confusion, as anything other than what they might actually be. Until that night in the gym, when Jonah looked at me and couldn't finish his sentence. Until the silence between us became impossible to ignore. The next day, Jonah acted like nothing had happened. I showed up to practice expecting awkwardness, maybe some distance, some acknowledgement of what had passed between us in that empty gym. But instead, Jonah was louder than usual, more performative. He made jokes at my expense during warm-ups, his voice carrying across the court so the whole team could hear. He called me slow, said I looked tired, asked if I'd stayed up all night thinking about how badly he was going to destroy me in our next game. The team laughed. I forced myself to laugh too, to play along, to give him the reactions he was fishing for. But I watched him carefully, watched the way his eyes would flicker toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. Watched the way his smile would falter for just a fraction of a second before he'd rebuild it, brighter and louder than before. He was overcompensating. I could see it now. All that noise, all that bravado was a shield, and I wondered how long he'd been hiding behind it. Practice felt longer than usual. Every drill, every scrimmage, every water break, I was hyper-aware of where Jonah was, what he was doing, whether he was watching me. And he was. His gaze found mine too often, lingering a beat too long before he'd look away and crack another joke, filling the silence before it could become meaningful. When Coach finally blew the whistle and dismissed us, everyone headed for the locker room in their usual chaotic rush. Showers running, music playing, voices overlapping in that familiar cacophony of a team winding down. I took my time, moving slower than usual, half hoping Jonah would seek me out, half terrified that he would. But he left with everyone else, disappeared into the parking lot with a group of guys, his laughter echoing back through the open doors. I told myself I was relieved. I finished changing, grabbed my bag, and headed out. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few scattered cars, mine among them, and Jonah's. He was leaning against the bleachers near the outdoor courts, hands shoved in his pockets, head tilted back like he was studying the clouds. When he heard my footsteps, he turned. The smirk he'd been wearing all day was gone. His face looked tired, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. I almost kept walking, almost pretended I hadn't seen him. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, like he'd been waiting, like he needed me to stop. I crossed the pavement slowly, stopping a few feet away from him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence felt fragile, like anything either of us said might shatter it. Finally, Jonah broke it. "You ever wonder why I talk so much?" The question caught me off guard. I frowned, tried to read his expression. To annoy me, he let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. His eyes were dark, serious, holding mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Maybe, or maybe it's because if I stop, I'll give myself away. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew what he meant. I knew exactly what he meant. But I couldn't move, couldn't respond. I just stood there, frozen, as the weight of his words settled between us. Jonah looked away first, his jaw tightening. He pushed off the bleachers, running a hand through his hair in that restless way he did when he was agitated. I shouldn't have said that. Forget it. He started to walk past me, toward the parking lot, and panic flared in my chest. I reached out without thinking, my hand catching his arm. He stopped immediately, his whole body going still. Jonah. My voice came out quieter than I'd intended. Steadier, though, than I felt. Don't run away from this. He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. Fear and hope tangled together, raw and exposed. From what? From you. For whatever this is. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. What if I don't know what this is? I want to tell him that I didn't know either. That I'd been just as confused, just as scared. That I'd spent months trying to convince myself that what I felt was nothing, that it would pass, that it was safer to keep pretending. But standing there with his arms still under my hand, with the last light of the day fading around us, I couldn't bring myself to lie. Then maybe we figure out together. Jonah's breath hitched. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Certain maybe permission. Some sign that I understood what I was saying, what I was offering. I held his gaze. Didn't look away. Didn't let myself retreat into safety. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a resolution. But it was a beginning. A crack in the wall he'd built around himself. And for now, that was enough. Things changed after that conversation. Not in obvious ways. Not in ways anyone else would have noticed. But between Jonah and me, everything felt different. The banter continued. He still talked trash during practice, still made jokes at my expense, still challenged me to shooting competitions that stretched long past when we should have gone home. But there was a new layer beneath it now. A weight to his words that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and I'd just been too afraid to acknowledge it. He'd say something that sounded casual, throwaway, the kind of comment that would have meant nothing a week ago. You're getting better at reading my moves. Almost like you've been studying me. And his eyes would hold mine a beat too long, and I'd feel the double meaning settle between us like a stone dropping into still water. Or he'd brush past me during a drill, his hand grazing my shoulder, and he'd mutter, "My bad," but his voice would be lower, softer, and I'd catch the way his breath hitched slightly before he pulled away. The silence between us became different too. Before, silence had been comfortable, easy. Now it felt charged, dangerous, like standing too close to the edge of something and knowing one wrong step would send us both tumbling over. I found myself watching him more carefully, noticing things I'd trained myself not to notice before. The way his throat moved when he swallowed. The way his fingers drummed against his thigh when he was thinking. The way his laughter would sometimes die too quickly. His expression shifting into something serious and searching when he looked at me. We were still careful around the team. Still maintained the easy friendship everyone expected from us. But when practice ended and the others filtered out, Jonah and I would linger. Sometimes we'd play one-on-one like always, but the games felt different now. More intense. Like we were trying to communicate something through the movement of our bodies that we couldn't say out loud. One evening, about a week after our conversation by the bleachers, we were the last ones in the gym again. The sky outside had gone dark, and the overhead lights cast everything in harsh fluorescent white. We just finished a game that had gone longer than usual, both of us too stubborn to call it, both of us pushing past exhaustion into something almost reckless. I'd won, barely, by a single point on a shot that had rattled around the rim for what felt like an eternity before finally dropping through. Jonah stood bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. His jersey was soaked through with sweat, his face flushed. When he finally straightened up, there was something wild in his eyes, something unguarded. He walked toward me, not stopping until he was close. Closer than he needed to be. Close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his skin, could count the rapid rise and fall of his chest. "You drive me crazy," You know that. His voice was rough, raw, not playful, not teasing, just honest in a way that made my throat tight. I steadied myself, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Then stop looking at me like that. It came out as barely more than a whisper, a challenge and a plea at the same time. Jonah froze, his eyes locked onto mine, dark and intense. For a moment, neither of us moved. The gym felt impossibly quiet, just the sound of our breathing and the low hum of the lights overhead. Then, softer than I'd ever heard him speak, "Can't." That single word hung between us, heavy with everything we'd been avoiding. All the things we'd been dancing around for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer than either of us wanted to admit. I should have stepped back, should have laughed it off, made a joke, done something to defuse the tension before it became too much. That's what the old version of me would have done. The careful version, the one who played it safe. But I didn't move, didn't look away. I held his gaze and let him see that I understood, that I felt it too, that whatever this thing was between us, I wasn't going to pretend anymore. Jonah's jaw tightened, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, like he was fighting the urge to reach for me. When he finally spoke again, his voice was strained. "We should go." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We gathered our things in silence, the weight of what hadn't been said pressing down on both of us. As we walked toward the exit, I was hyper-aware of the space between us. 6 inches, maybe less. It would have been so easy to close that gap, to let my hand brush against his, to stop pretending that the distance between us was anything other than a choice we were both making. At the door, Jonah paused. He looked at me one more time, and something in his expression looked almost like surrender, like he'd been fighting a battle with himself and had finally lost, or maybe won. I couldn't tell anymore. He pushed through the door without another word, and I followed him out into the cold night air, wondering how much longer either of us could keep this up. It took another 3 days before I finally asked him. 3 days of the same careful dance. 3 days of loaded glances and words that meant more than they should. 3 days of going home alone and lying awake, replaying every moment, every gesture, trying to decode what was happening between us. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep existing in this strange liminal space where everything felt significant, but nothing was spoken. Where we both knew something had shifted, but neither of us was brave enough to name it. We were in the gym again. Of course we were. It had become our confessional, our sanctuary, the only place where the rest of the world fell away, and it was just the two of us. Practice had ended an hour ago, and we'd stayed to run drills like always. But the energy was different tonight. Heavier, like we were both waiting for something to break. Jonah was at the free throw line, practicing his form. I was supposed to be rebounding for him, but instead I was just standing there, watching the way he dribbled twice before each shot, watching the way his shoulders tensed with concentration, watching the way he'd glance at me between attempts, like he was checking to make sure I was still there. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "What did you almost say that night?" My voice cut through the rhythm of his dribbling. He caught the ball mid-bounce, his whole body going still. He didn't look at me. "What?" "That night, when you stopped talking, when you looked at me and forgot what you were going to say." I paused, my heart hammering. What were you going to say? The silence that followed felt endless. Jonah stood there holding the basketball, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought he might not answer. Thought he might deflect, make a joke, rebuild the walls he'd let slip. But then he turned around. His face was pale, his jaw tight. His eyes met mine, and there was something devastated in them. Something that looked like fear and relief tangled together. Does it matter? Yes. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It matters. He let out a long breath, his grip tightening on the ball. He looked away, stared at some point on the far wall, like he couldn't bear to face me while he said it. I was going to tell you that you looked good that night. That's how it started in my head. Just a stupid throwaway comment. But then I realized I couldn't say it the way I wanted to. Couldn't say it the way it actually meant something. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And then I looked at you and realized I'd been doing this for months. Hiding behind the trash talk. Turning everything into a joke, so I wouldn't have to admit what I was really feeling. And in that moment, standing there with you looking at me like that, I couldn't remember how to pretend anymore. My chest ached. I took a step toward him, then another. What were you feeling? Jonah's laugh was bitter, hollow. You really going to make me say it? Yes. He finally looked at me then, and the raw honesty in his expression nearly broke me. That I can't joke with you anymore without wanting more. The words hung between us, stark and undeniable. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, like everything I'd thought I understood about us had just been rewritten. More? I managed to get the word out barely. Jonah set the basketball down, let it roll away across the court. He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and surrender. More than this. More than just staying late and pretending that's all it is. More than looking at you and having to turn it into some joke so you won't see what I'm actually thinking. He took a shaky breath. I want to stop pretending that you're just my friend. That this is just competition. That I don't notice every time you walk into a room. That I don't look for you first thing every morning. That I don't make excuses to touch your shoulder or stand too close or find reasons for us to be alone together. His voice cracked slightly. I want to stop acting like I don't think about you constantly. Like I don't replay every conversation we have. Like this whole thing between us is just normal friendship, and I'm not completely losing my mind over you. The silence after was vast, fragile. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think. Everything I'd been feeling, everything I'd been afraid to name, he just laid out between us like an offering. I think you knew that already. His voice was barely a whisper now, and when I looked at him, I saw how terrified he was. How vulnerable. How completely exposed. He was right. Some part of me had known, had felt it in every lingering glance, every loaded silence, every moment when the space between us felt charged with something neither of us could name. But knowing and hearing him say it out loud were two completely different things. I closed the remaining distance between us, stood close enough that I could see the way his chest was rising and falling too quickly, the way his hands were trembling slightly at his sides. You're right, I said quietly. I didn't know. Jonah's eyes searched mine, desperate and hopeful and terrified all at once. And for the record, I continued, my voice steady now, certain I've been losing my mind over you too. Something shifted in Jonah's expression when I said those words. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it softened, made room for something else, something that looked like hope. He opened his mouth, and I knew he was about to say something. Probably something self-deprecating, or maybe another confession that would leave us both raw and exposed. But I'd heard enough words. We'd spent weeks, maybe months, talking around this thing between us, building it up with silence and loaded glances and sentences that died before they could become truth. I didn't want more words. Not right now. So when his lips parted and his breath hitched like he was gathering courage, I made a choice. I closed the space between us and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't the kind of moment you'd see in movies, with rain falling or music swelling or any of that cinematic beauty. It was just us in a quiet gym that smelled like sweat and floor polish under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything too bright and too real. But it was perfect because it was honest. Jonah went completely still for half a second, like his brain was trying to catch up with what was happening. Then I felt his breath rush out against my mouth, felt his hand come up to grip my arm, his fingers tightening like he was afraid I might disappear if he didn't hold on. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of us testing this new territory, this line we'd finally crossed after dancing around it for so long. His lips were softer than I'd imagined, warmer, and when he tilted his head slightly to deepen the kiss, something in my chest cracked open. All the tension we'd been carrying, all the careful distance we'd maintained, all the pretending, it melted away. His other hand came up to cup the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I let myself lean into him. Let myself stop thinking about consequences or what this meant or what would happen after. For the first time in months, I just let myself feel. When we finally broke apart, neither of us moved very far. Jonah's forehead dropped against mine, his breathing uneven, his hand still tangled in my hair. I could feel his pulse racing where my palm rested against his chest. We stood like that for a long moment, neither of us speaking. The gym was so quiet I could hear the buzz of the lights overhead, could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then Jonah let out a soft laugh, and I felt it more than heard it, the gentle shake of his shoulders, the warm breath against my skin. Guess I finally forgot what I was saying. His voice was rough, almost broken, but there was something lighter in it now. Something that sounded like relief. I pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were bright, slightly dazed, like he still couldn't quite believe what had just happened. There was color in his cheeks, and his lips were slightly swollen, and he looked more unguarded than I'd ever seen him. "Good," I said quietly, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "I'd rather you show me." Something flickered in his eyes at that. Something heated and vulnerable and achingly honest. He studied my face like he was memorizing it, like he was trying to convince himself this was real. "Show you?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. My heart was still racing, my hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline and something deeper. Something that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. Jonah's hand slid from the back of my neck down to my jaw, his thumb brushing against my cheek with a gentleness that made my breath catch. He looked at me like I was something precious, something he'd been afraid to reach for and still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. His voice was soft, uncertain in a way I'd never heard from him before. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I said honestly. "But we'll figure it out." It was the same thing I told him days ago by the bleachers. The same promise. That we didn't have to have all the answers. That we could take this one step at a time, together. Jonah nodded slowly, then pulled me back into another kiss. This one was different from the first. Less tentative. More certain. Like he was finally allowing himself to want this, to want me, without shame or fear holding him back. When we broke apart again, he was smiling. A real smile, not the performative grin he wore for the team or the smirk he used to hide behind. This was soft and genuine and meant only for me. "We should probably go," he said eventually, though he made no move to step away. "Probably," I agreed, but neither of us moved. We just stood there in the middle of the court, holding on to each other like we were afraid that leaving this moment would somehow break the spell. That stepping out of this gym and back into the real world would force us back into pretending. Finally, reluctantly, we pulled apart, gathered our things in comfortable silence. But this time, when we walked to the door, Jonah's hand found mine. His fingers threaded through mine like they belonged there, like this was something we'd done 1,000 times before. And when we stepped out into the night air, everything felt different. The same campus, the same parking lot, the same stars overhead. But we weren't the same people we'd been when we walked in. We'd finally stopped pretending. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since everything changed. 3 weeks since we stopped pretending that the thing between us was just friendship, just competition, just anything other than what it actually was. From the outside, nothing looks different. Practice still runs the same way it always has. The team still jokes and competes and pushes each other. Coach still blows his whistle at the same moments, calls the same plays, runs us through the same drills we've done 100 times before. And Jonah and I still stay late. We still play one-on-one after everyone else has gone home, still talk trash, still push each other past exhaustion into that place where everything else falls away and it's just us in the game. The rhythm of it is familiar, comfortable. To anyone watching, we look exactly the same as we always have. But everything is different now. The trash talk doesn't land the same way anymore. When Jonah tells me I'm getting slow, there's no edge to it. When I remind him I won our last game, he just smiles. That soft, genuine smile that he used to hide. The one that's just for me. The silences are different too. Before, silence between us felt dangerous. Heavy with everything we weren't saying, everything we were afraid to acknowledge. Now, silence feels like relief. Like we finally set down a weight we'd been carrying for too long. Tonight, practice ended half an hour ago. The gym is empty except for us, the way it always is. We're sitting on the bleachers, catching our breath after a game that went longer than it should have. Jonah's shoulder is pressed against mine, and neither of us feels the need to maintain any distance. He's quiet tonight, quieter than usual, not in the old way, where silence meant he was hiding something. This is different, peaceful. I glance at him, taking away his hair is damp with sweat, the way his chest is still rising and falling from exertion. The way he's staring out at the empty court like he's lost in thought. What are you thinking about? I ask. He turns to look at me, and something in his expression makes my chest tighten. It's open, unguarded. The kind of look he never would have given me before. The kind that says he's not afraid anymore. Just how different this feels, he says quietly. Being here with you. Not having to pretend anymore. I nod, understanding exactly what he means. Good different. The best different. He pauses, his hand finding mine on the bench between us. His fingers thread through mine naturally now, like it's instinct. Sometimes I can't believe we wasted so much time dancing around this. We were scared, I say simply. Both of us. Yeah. His thumb brushes against the back of my hand. But I'm not scared anymore. Neither am I. It's true. The fear that had lived in my chest for months, the constant anxiety about what these feelings meant, about whether he felt the same, about what would happen if we crossed that line. It's gone. Replaced by something steadier. Something that feels like certainty. Jonas shifts closer, his head dropping to rest against my shoulder. It's a casual gesture, intimate in its simplicity. The kind of thing we never could have done before without both of us overanalyzing it, without the weight of everything unspoken making it complicated. Now it's just easy. We sit like that for a while, neither of us in any hurry to leave. The gym is warm, the lights overhead humming softly. Outside, the sun has fully set, and I can see stars through the high windows. Everything feels suspended, peaceful. Eventually, Jonas speaks again, his voice soft. You know what's funny? All that trash talk, all those jokes, I thought that was the only way I could get close to you. Thought if I stopped, you'd see right through me. I did see through you, I tell him. I just didn't know if you wanted me to. He laughs quietly against my shoulder. Guess we were both idiots. Guess so. Another comfortable silence settles over us. Jonah's breathing has evened out, his body relaxed against mine. I close my eyes, letting myself just exist in this moment. No anxiety about what comes next. No fear about what this means. Just this. Just us. We should probably head out, Jonah says eventually, though he makes no move to get up. Probably I agree, not moving either. But then he does shift, pulling back just enough to look at me. His eyes are soft in the dim light, his expression more content than I've ever seen it. He leans in slowly, giving me time to close the distance if I want to, and I do. The kiss is gentle, unhurried, different from that first desperate kiss 3 weeks ago. This one speaks of certainty, of knowing we have time. When we break apart, Jonah stands, pulling me up with him. We gather our things in comfortable silence, the way we've done countless times before. But when we walk toward the door, his hand finds mine again, holds it like it's the most natural thing in the world. As we step out into the cool night air, I think about how we got here. All the weeks of loaded glances and words that meant more than they should. All the silence that used to feel heavy and now feels like peace. All the pretending that finally gave way to truth. The trash talk has become silence, and silence has become something better, something real. And standing here with Jonah's hand in mine, the gym behind us and the rest of our lives ahead, I know we're exactly where we're supposed to be,